She was on her knees, on the cold kitchen floor, both hands pressed flat against the tiles like she was trying to hold the earth steady beneath her, crying so hard her whole body shook. Not the quiet kind of crying, the kind that comes from somewhere so deep inside a person that when it finally breaks free, it takes everything with it. Composure, pride, the careful wall she had spent decades building brick by brick. And the man standing over her was not her enemy. He was her son. Park Joon-ho stood in that kitchen doorway, 31 years old, and he felt something crack inside his chest. Not the clean crack of something breaking, the slow, terrible crack of something that had been bending for a very long time, finally reaching its limit. "Choose," his mother whispered. Her voice was raw. Her eyes were red. She did not look away from him. "Choose right now. Her or me." He had never heard his mother say anything like that. Not once. Not in 31 years. Sun-hee Park was not a woman who begged. She was not a woman who got on her knees. She was not a woman who let anyone see the soft parts of her. She had kept those parts locked away for so long that Joon-ho had sometimes wondered if they were still there at all. Now here she was, on the floor. And the thing that had finally broken her open was not illness, not grief, not loss. It was the name of a woman she had never once tried to know. Park Joon-ho stood there, frozen at the threshold, the weight of everything he had ever loved pulling him apart from the inside. On one side, his mother, the woman who had carried him, raised him alone, worked double shifts at a textile factory for 17 years so that he could go to university, so that he would have a life she had never been given. The woman whose hands were permanently rough from labor she had never once complained about. The woman who called him every morning at exactly 7:15, as if the world would come undone if she missed a single day. And on the other side, a woman his mother had refused to know. A woman she had called, more than once, in tones she thought he could not hear. An African nobody. What Park Joon-ho did in the next few seconds would either destroy his family forever or become the first step toward saving it. But here is the thing, and this is the part that nobody in that room understood yet. Not Joon-ho, not his mother, not the woman waiting in the next room. What was about to unfold over the coming weeks would pull a secret out of the ground that had been buried for over 30 years. A secret so old and so painful that when it finally surfaced, the woman his mother had despised, dismissed, tried to drive away, she would be the only one with the power, the grace, and the heart to put it right. Stay with this story all the way to the end, because I promise you, nothing about this is what it looks like right now. If this opening already has something stirring in your chest, do yourself one favor right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. Every week on this channel, we tell stories exactly like this one. Stories about love that refuses to give up. Stories about secrets that change everything. Stories about the people who hurt us most and why. You do not want to miss a single one. To understand what happened in that kitchen, you have to go back. Not to the beginning of Joon-ho and Adaese's love story, though we will get there. You have to go back further than that. You have to go back to the beginning of Sun-hee. Park Sun-hee was born in 1963 in a small city in South Chungcheong Province, the second of 3 daughters in a family that had climbed carefully and deliberately into the lower rungs of the Korean middle class. Her father was a civil servant, precise, formal, proud of the social standing that came with government work, even when the salary was modest. Her mother was a school teacher who kept an immaculate house and taught her daughters, by relentless example, that a woman's worth was measured in her composure, her sacrifice, and her ability to endure difficulty without letting it show on her face. Sun-hee was the brightest of the 3 sisters. Everyone who knew her in school said so. Her teachers said so. Her parents said so. Privately, not to her face, because they were not the kind of people who offered compliments directly. She had a mind that moved quickly and a curiosity that went in all directions at once. And when she was admitted to a university in Seoul on a partial scholarship at 18, she felt for the first time in her carefully controlled life like the world had opened a door it had previously kept shut. Seoul was different from anything she had known. Bigger, louder, more complicated, more free. And the university, with its lecture halls and its student clubs and its corridors full of people from different provinces and different backgrounds and, increasingly, different countries, felt like a place where it might be possible to become something other than what had already been decided for her. That was where she met him, His name was Kofi Mensah. He was 22 years old, from Accra, Ghana, one of a small cohort of African students attending the university on a Korean government exchange scholarship, part of an early diplomatic program that was still new enough to attract curious stares when the students walked across campus. He was studying architecture. He was tall and serious-looking until he smiled, and then his whole face changed, opened up, became something warm and entirely disarming. They met in the university library in the autumn of 1986. Sun-hee was there, studying for an economics exam. Kofi was there struggling with a Korean grammar textbook. He asked her, in halting Korean mixed with English, if she could help him understand a sentence that was confusing him. She looked at the sentence. It was not particularly complicated, but she explained it anyway. He came back the next day with another question, and the day after that. Within 3 weeks, they had established a routine that neither of them had formally agreed to, but both of them had begun to count on. They would meet in the library after their afternoon classes. He would practice his Korean. She would explain idioms and grammar and the strange logic of a language she had never had to think consciously about before. And somewhere in between the language lessons they talked. About everything. About his childhood in Accra and the sound of rain on a metal roof. About her childhood in Chungcheong and the particular loneliness of being the clever daughter in a family that wasn't sure what to do with clever daughters. About architecture and economics and what each of them was afraid of and what each of them dreamed about. She had never talked to anyone the way she talked to Kofi Mensah, not because he was perfect. He wasn't. He was stubborn and occasionally oblivious, and once fell asleep in the library while she was mid-sentence, which she never entirely forgave him for. But he was genuinely curious about her. Not about what she could become for someone else, not about her potential usefulness as a wife or a daughter or a social asset. About her. What she thought, what she felt, what she wanted. Nobody had ever asked Sun-hee what she wanted. By the spring of 1987, they were in love, quietly, carefully, aware of every reason the world might consider it impossible, and choosing to disregard each one. They did not advertise it. They met on weekend afternoons in a small cafe near the campus that was off the regular student path. They walked together along the Han River after dark, when the city's watching eyes were fewer. They were not hiding, exactly. They were simply protecting something fragile, before it was strong enough to withstand public air. The letters began that summer, when Sun-hee went home to her parents for the school break, and Kofi remained in Seoul. They wrote to each other every week. His letters to her were in Korean, improving all the time, tender and earnest, full of small observations about the city they were both temporarily separated from. Hers to him were in a mixture of Korean and the English she had been carefully polishing since secondary school. In those letters, away from Seoul, away from the daily weight of her family's expectations, she was more herself than she ever managed to be in person. Funnier, more honest, more alive. She saved every letter he ever sent her. She would keep them, without ever reading them again, in a wooden chest on top of her wardrobe, for the next 30 years. The year was 2019, and Seoul in October was doing what Seoul always does, turning into something out of a painting. The ginkgo trees along Bukchon Hanok village blazed yellow and gold. The air carried that particular autumn sharpness that makes everything feel significant, and the city hummed with the restless energy of a place that never entirely stops moving. Park Joon-ho was 31 years old, and for the first time in his adult life, he was genuinely, almost embarrassingly happy. He worked as a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm in Gangnam. Not glamorous, not wealthy, but solid and honest work that used his mind and gave him the particular satisfaction of knowing that the things he helped design would stand. He had a small apartment in Mapo-gu, a car that started reliably, a gym membership he actually used 4 times a week, and a mother who called him every morning at exactly 7:15 without fail, rain or shine, sick or healthy, as though the day could not properly begin until she had confirmed that he was still in the world and doing all right. He had grown up understanding that his mother's love was not soft. It was not the kind that arrived in gentle words and easy affection. It was forged in sacrifice, in calloused hands and dark circles under her eyes, and a refrigerator that was somehow always full, even in the months when Joon-ho, doing the math as he got older, understood that the numbers did not quite add up. His father had left when Joon-ho was 4 years old. No argument, no warning, no forwarding address. There one morning, gone by evening, as if he had simply stepped through a door and found another life waiting on the other side. Sun-hee had absorbed that abandonment the way she absorbed everything, by going silent for a short time and then straightening her back and continuing. She never cried about it in front of Junho, never spoke badly of his father, simply closed that door, locked it, and redirected every ounce of energy she had toward the boy who was still there. She worked double shifts at the factory for 11 years. Then she took a supervisory role that paid better and demanded more. Then she saved enough to put Junho through university without debt. Then she stepped back, watched him build his life, and kept calling every morning at 7:15, as if the ritual itself was the last remaining structure of the fortress she had built around them both. So when Junho called her one Thursday evening in late October and said, with a particular lightness in his voice she had not heard before, "Chioma, there's someone I want you to meet," she understood immediately that this was not just a friend. "A woman?" she asked, her voice careful. "Yes," he said, "someone very special." There was a pause, just a breath of one, but Junho would replay it many times in the months that followed, wondering if he had already heard the trouble in it. "Is she Korean?" Sun-hee asked. Junho exhaled slowly. He had known this question was coming. He had been thinking about how to answer it for 3 weeks. In the end, there was no answer except the truth. "No, Ioma," he said. "She's from Nigeria. Her name is Adaize." The silence that followed was so long and so complete that for a moment he genuinely believed the call had dropped. "Ioma, I heard you," she said quietly. And then she said goodnight, in the flat, careful voice she used when she needed to end a conversation before she said something she would not be able to take back, and she hung up. Adaize Okonkwo had come to Seoul 3 years earlier on a research fellowship at Yonsei University. She was studying public health policy, specifically the intersection of government healthcare infrastructure and community-level health outcomes in rapidly urbanizing societies. She was 28 years old, from Enugu State in southeastern Nigeria, the eldest daughter of a retired secondary school principal and a civil engineer who had built small bridges across rivers in the Enugu hinterland for 30 years. She carried herself with a quality that was difficult to name precisely, a settled, unhurried confidence that didn't announce itself or demand acknowledgement. It simply existed, like good architecture. You noticed it by the way a space felt when you were in it, not by any single feature you could point to. She had a laugh that came from somewhere genuinely deep, the kind that made strangers on the Seoul subway look up involuntarily and find themselves smiling without knowing why. She spoke 4 languages, Igbo, English, French, and Korean, and she had not stopped at conversational Korean. She had pushed through to the kind of fluency that allows for nuance and humor and the gentle needling of someone you like, which was, she had discovered, the only fluency that actually counted. She and Junho had met on a Saturday morning in February at a community hiking group that went up Bukhansan Mountain on the second weekend of every month. He had been going for 2 years. She had joined 3 months earlier. They had been politely aware of each other for those 3 months in the way that people in a recurring group are, exchanging nods, occasionally walking in the same cluster up a slope, never quite falling into conversation. That changed at the summit. Junho had brought too much food, as he always did, and he offered her the extra kimbap he could not finish. She had looked at it, looked at him, and then, in perfectly accented Korean, she had said, "You do know there is a full convenience store at the base, right?" He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the kimbap over the edge of the mountain. She caught his arm to steady him, and something in the ease of that gesture, the lack of self-consciousness, the warmth of it, told him that this was a person worth knowing. They had been inseparable for 8 months by the time he called his mother. Adaize knew about Sun-hee. Junho had been honest with her from early on. His mother was the center of his life, was proud and traditional in certain specific ways, had certain expectations about the shape his future should take, that there would likely be resistance, that it might take patience and time. Adaize had listened to all of it, with those steady, watchful eyes of hers, and then she had said, "I'm not afraid of time." What she could not have known then, what Junho himself did not yet understand, was that his mother's resistance was not rooted where either of them assumed it was. It was not tradition, not really. It was something much older and much more private, something Sun-hee Park had buried so deep inside herself that she no longer knew it was still alive down there, still breathing, still shaping everything she did and feared and refused. The first meeting between Sun-hee and Adaize happened on a Sunday in early November, at a restaurant in Sinchon that Junho had chosen with the kind of agonized care usually reserved for diffusing things. Not too formal. He didn't want his mother to feel she was being presented with a fait accompli at a fancy dinner table. Not too casual. He didn't want Adaize to feel she was being hidden, tucked into some low-key corner as though she were something to be apologized for. A middle ground. Warm lighting. Good food. Room for a nervous conversation to breathe. He arrived first, and sat facing the door, watching it the way you watch a door when you are not sure what is going to walk through it. Adaize arrived next, in a deep burgundy wrap dress with her lokes pinned up, her expression composed and warm and carrying beneath it. He could see it, because he knew her well enough by now to see it. The particular tension of someone who has decided to be brave. His mother arrived 7 minutes late. Junho had never, in his life, known his mother to be late for anything. Not a doctor's appointment, not a family dinner, not a factory shift. 7 minutes. He understood, without being told, that the 7 minutes were not carelessness. They were armor. The last small piece of control available to a woman who was walking into a situation she had not chosen and could not fully manage. Sun-hee Park was 56 years old, small and precisely put together, with close-cropped graying hair and eyes that catalogued a room in seconds. She sat down, placed her handbag neatly on the seat beside her, folded her hands on the table, and looked at Adaize. The expression on her face was not hostile. It was something harder to deal with than hostility. It was sealed, completely, deliberately sealed, like a letter that had been glued shut. "Annyeonghaseyo," Adaize said, dipping her head with genuine respect. Her Korean was fluent and careful. "It is a true honor to meet you. Junho speaks of you with so much love." Something moved across Sun-hee's face, very quickly. Surprise, perhaps, at the quality of the Korean, or at the directness. It was there, and then it was managed and gone. "Hello?" Sun-hee said. In Korean. Nothing more. The meal that followed was a careful, exhausting performance. Adaize was extraordinary at it, asking Sun-hee questions about her life, her neighborhood, her preferences, drawing her out with genuine curiosity. And Sun-hee would answer. For brief stretches she would almost open, would almost lean forward, would almost let something real come through. And then she would catch herself, pull back, look at the table, or the window, or her chopsticks, anywhere but the face of the young woman across from her. When Adaize excused herself to use the bathroom, Sun-hee turned to Junho the instant she was out of earshot. "She seems intelligent," she said. Her voice was measured, neutral. Junho felt something cautiously hopeful stir. "She is, Ioma. She's remarkable." "It doesn't matter," Sun-hee said quietly, picking up her chopsticks. "This is not going to work." "Why not?" She looked at the table. "Because it isn't. People like us, we don't mix like this. It creates difficulties. For everyone. For the children especially." Junho put down his chopsticks. He kept his voice low. "People like us," he repeated carefully. "What does that mean, Ioma? I want you to say it clearly." She didn't answer. She moved food around her plate with the calm, deliberate focus of someone who had decided the subject was closed. When Adaize came back, she sat down, poured everyone fresh water without being asked, and made a gentle comment about the restaurant's interior design. She had read the silence at the table perfectly. She was steering them away from the edge, back to somewhere safer, giving everyone a way to continue the evening with their dignity intact. Junho watched her do this and felt something settle even deeper in his chest. He had not imagined her. He had not constructed her out of longing. She was exactly who he had believed her to be, and somehow, that made what was coming harder, not easier. The months that followed were a slow erosion. Sun-hee never shouted. She never made scenes. She made her position known through the quiet, relentless accumulation of small choices, each one individually deniable, collectively unmistakable. She declined dinner invitations when she knew Adaize would be there. She had pressing errands on the weekend. Junho had suggested they all visit Gyeongbokgung together. When Junho mentioned Adaize's name on their morning calls, and he kept mentioning it, deliberately, because he refused to let his mother pretend she did not exist, Sun-hee would go quiet, or pivot to something practical, or offer a comment so carefully emptied of emotion that it functioned like a wall. Once, when Junho showed her a photo on his phone, the two of them laughing at the top of a mountain, Adaeze's face open and joyful in the autumn light. Sunhee looked at it for a long moment and said, "She looks very far from home. Not cruel. Not exactly. But not kind either." Adaeze, for her part, bore all of it with a patience that Junho found almost painful to witness. She never asked him to choose, never spoke badly of Sunhee, not in anger, not even in the private space of their conversations when he was raw and frustrated and would have understood. She simply held her ground, continued her work, continued building her life and soul, her research, her language skills, the growing circle of colleagues and friends who valued and admired her. She was not waiting for Sunhee to accept her. She was not shrinking or performing or lobbying for approval. She was simply living, fully, and without apology, and leaving a door open that the other woman was not yet ready to walk through. "She's afraid of something," Adaeze told him one evening, sitting cross-legged on his living room floor with a bowl of spicy ramen, her reading glasses pushed up into her lokes. "Your mother. Whatever this is, it isn't really about me." Junho looked at her. "Then what is it about?" She was quiet for a moment, turning her spoon in the broth. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I think you probably need to ask her. Not about me, about herself." He didn't. Not then. Asking Sunhee certain questions had always felt, to Junho, like pressing on a bruise she had never admitted was there. The bruise of his father's departure. The bruise of all those years alone. She had managed it by not acknowledging it, and Junho had always, out of love or cowardice or both, respected the terms of that management. He would not be able to do that much longer. The breaking point came in March of 2020. The world was already beginning to come apart at the seams. COVID-19 was spreading across Korea with a speed that made every ordinary plan suddenly conditional. The city was tightening, streets going quiet, faces disappearing behind masks. The particular anxiety of a moment when the familiar suddenly feels fragile. It was in this atmosphere that Junho asked Adaeze to move in with him. Her fellowship at Yonsei was ending. International travel had become uncertain. They had been together for over a year. They had discussed it practically, honestly, the way they discussed most things, laying out the logistics and the feelings with equal seriousness, arriving together at a conclusion that felt right to both of them. She said yes, he told his mother on a Tuesday morning. On the phone, afterward, he would try to remember exactly how long the silence lasted. It felt very long. It might have been 10 seconds. It felt like several minutes. Then Sunhee said, in a voice absolutely stripped of any inflection, "If you allow that woman to move into your home, I will not set foot in it again." Junho felt something go quiet inside him. Not angry, not yet, just quiet. The way a room goes quiet right before something important is said. "Ioma," he said, and his voice was very controlled, very steady. "She has a name. Her name is Adaeze, and I am going to marry her." He had not planned to say that last part. He had been thinking it for months, had known it in the way you know certain things before you have the language for them, but he had not meant to say it like this, on a phone call, in response to an ultimatum. The line was silent for so long that he thought she had simply hung up. Then you have made your choice. And she was gone. 3 weeks of silence. No morning calls at 7:15. No messages. No contact of any kind. Just a silence so thick and heavy that Junho would wake at 3 a.m. and feel it pressing against his chest. An absence where the rhythm of his mother had always been. He threw himself into the Incheon infrastructure project his firm was handling. Brutally long hours, the good exhaustion of demanding work, a place to put his hands while his heart was unsettled. He came home to Adaeze, who watched him carefully and gave him space, and made food that she left in the refrigerator for him to find at midnight, which was its own particular language. "You should try to reach her," Adaeze said one evening, about 2 weeks in. "She hung up on me," Junho said. "I know." Adaeze looked at him steadily. "She's also a woman who has been alone for a very long time, who is terrified of losing the only person she has." A pause. "Her pride will not let her call first. It doesn't mean she doesn't want you to." He thought about this for a long time. It was during those weeks of silence that Junho began, almost accidentally, to pull at a thread he had never thought to find. He was at his Aunt Minjung's apartment in Noan. helping her deal with a broken pipe that the building's maintenance man had failed 3 times to properly fix. While his aunt was in the kitchen on the phone with the plumber, Junho wandered into the living room and looked around with the unfocused gaze of someone waiting. His eyes moved across the bookshelf along the wall, family photos in frames, his grandmother, his aunt and mother as young women, him at various ages, and then a gap, not a small one, a deliberate gap, clearly and recently made. The wallpaper behind it was visibly lighter, where something had stood for years. A frame had been there, a photograph, by the look of the shape, and it had been removed, recently, within the last few months maybe. Something small and instinctive moved in Junho's chest. When his aunt came back, he asked her casually, nodding at the shelf, what was there? Minjung glanced at the gap. Her expression did something complicated. A flicker, quickly smoothed. Old photograph. I moved it. Of who? Nobody important. She turned toward the kitchen. Do you want tea? She was already gone before he could ask anything else, but her voice had tightened, just barely, in the way that voices tighten when the answer is the precise opposite of what the words claim. He drove home, turning it over. Nobody important. The careful way she'd said it. The photograph that had stood in that spot for years, judging by the lighter square of wall, and been removed recently. Recently enough that his visit was probably not the first time someone might have asked. 2 days later, he went to his mother's apartment. She was not home. She had told him she was visiting her old colleague from the factory, a regular Thursday arrangement. Junho still had a key. He had always had a key. He let himself in, watered her plants as he had been doing during the estrangement, and stood in the middle of her immaculate, silent apartment, and felt the presence of all the things she had never said. He stood in the doorway of her bedroom for a long time. The wooden chest on top of the wardrobe was not new to him. He had known it his entire life. It had always been there. He had been told, from the time he was old enough to be curious, that it contained private papers and that he was not to touch it. Children understand, when adults say things like that the prohibition is serious. He had never questioned it, had grown up and forgotten it, more or less, in the way you forget the rules that become invisible through age. He was 31 years old. His mother was not speaking to him, and something was pulling at him like a current he was only now beginning to feel the strength of. He pulled a chair to the wardrobe and climbed up and brought the chest down. He carried it to the edge of his mother's bed and sat down and opened it. Inside, letters, photographs, a pressed flower, dried to translucency, its original color impossible to determine. 2 folded pages that looked like journal entries, in his mother's handwriting, younger, less controlled, the pen pressing harder than it did now, and beneath all of it, bundled together with a faded red ribbon, a stack of envelopes with Korean addresses and Ghanaian return addresses. He sat with those letters for 3 hours. The envelopes were addressed in Korean, labored, careful Korean, the handwriting of someone who had learned it as a second language and taken pains to get every character right. The return addresses were from different locations over the years, a student dormitory, then a university address in Accra, then what appeared to be a residential address, all in the name of Kofi Mensah. The letters themselves were in a mixture of Korean and English. The earlier ones were lighter, full of observations about Seoul in winter, about the difficulties of a Korean grammar that kept surprising him, about a particular Pojang matcha near the campus that he had become devoted to, about the views from Namsan at sunset. They were the letters of a young man writing to the person he most wanted to tell things to. The later ones were different. They were desperate in the way that only correspondence can be when the person you are writing to has stopped writing back and you do not understand why. He had written that he did not know what had changed, that he hoped she was well, that whatever her family had said to her, whatever pressure was being placed on her, he wanted her to know that he understood, but that he also needed to know she was all right, that she had made a choice freely and was not being forced into something, that he would wait for her if there was any chance, that he loved her, that she did not have to answer every letter, just one, just to let him know. There was no record of Sunhee's replies, because there had been no replies. The last letter was dated September 1989. It was short. It said, "I have stopped waiting. I wish you a good life, Sunhee. I mean that sincerely. Goodbye." 6 months after that letter, Sunhee Park had married Park Dong-hyun, Junho's father, in a ceremony arranged by her father, the man who had left when Junho was 4 years old and never looked back. Junho sat on the edge of his mother's bed in the afternoon light, holding these letters, and he thought about what Adeyeze had said. She's afraid of something. It isn't really about me. He thought about his mother looking at the photograph of Adeyeze on the mountaintop and saying, she looks very far from home. He thought about Adeyeze's looks and her 4 languages, and her particular brand of patient, unshakable clarity. And he thought about a young woman from Accra who had learned Korean by hand and written to a girl in Chungcheong until she stopped writing back. And he understood. He understood everything. His mother had loved a man like Adeyeze once, had been loved by him, and had been ripped away from that love by her father's ultimatum, not so different, in its bones, from the ultimatum she had just issued to her own son. She had watched her love disappear into silence, had married a man she did not choose, had raised a child alone after that man left, and had spent 30 years burying the grief and the guilt of it under layers of sacrifice and pride and rigid, defensive love. And now her son had brought to her door a woman from the same continent that man had come from, a woman with the same kind of unhurried confidence, the same deep laugh, the same quality of rootedness, the same refusal to disappear. When Sun Hee looked at Adeyeze, she was not looking at something foreign and threatening. She was looking at the life she had been forbidden to choose, and it was tearing her apart. If this story has stopped your breath for even a moment, if something in Sun Hee's secret has hit you somewhere real, then right now, in this moment, hit that like button, not for the algorithm, for the stories, because this one is just getting to its most important part, and I need you to stay all the way to the end. Junho did not go to his mother that night. He sat for a long time in her apartment after putting the chest back, then drove home and sat some more, letting the full weight of what he now understood settle into the right places inside him. He found Adeyeze at the kitchen table working on a research paper, her reading glasses on, her desk lamp making a small warm circle in the otherwise dark apartment. She looked up when he came in, and immediately put her pen down. "What happened?" she said. He sat across from her and told her everything. All of it. The chest, the letters, Kofi Mensah, the dates, the timeline. He told her about his grandfather's ultimatum, and his mother's silence, and the marriage that had followed and collapsed. He spoke for a long time. She listened without interrupting, her elbows on the table, watching his face. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, the deep, full kind of quiet that is not absence, but attention. Then she said, "She has been punishing herself for 30 years. "Yes," Junho said, "and punishing us for it. Not bitterly, just clearly, a statement of fact." "Yes." Adeyeze looked at her hands, then back at him. "Where is he now?" "Kofi Mensah." Junho had already, on his drive home, searched on his phone. "Accra. He's a retired professor of architecture. He has a family, a wife, grown children. He runs a small design foundation." Adeyeze nodded slowly, taking this in. "She needs to know he's okay," she said quietly. She's been carrying that, probably, the not knowing. Whether what her father did broke him, whether the silence she kept hurt him permanently. That kind of not knowing eats a person from the inside. Junho stared at her. "How are you this calm right now? This woman has been trying to drive you out of my life for over a year. And the first thing you think about is what she needs." Adeyeze looked at him for a long moment. "Because I understand what grief does to people, when it has nowhere to go," she said. "My grandmother lost my grandfather when she was 42. She shut herself up like a house with all the windows nailed closed. Wouldn't let anyone close for 15 years. Used to say she was protecting herself." She paused. She was just lonely. Lonely and scared, and convinced that love only ever ended in loss, so better not to let it in again. She picked up her pen and turned it in her fingers. "Your mother isn't cruel. She's lonely, and she's been blaming me for the shape of her own grief." "What do I do?" Junho asked. Adeyeze set the pen down carefully. "You talk to her. You show her what you found. You don't punish her for it. You just show her, and then you let her decide what she does with it." He called his mother the next morning. Not at 7:15. She had stopped calling at 7:15. He called at noon, in the plain middle of a Wednesday, when there was no morning rush to hide in, and nowhere to be. She answered on the 4th ring. "Junho," she said. "Wary. Careful." "Ioma," he said. "I need to see you. Today if you can. It's important. Are you all right?" "Yes." But I need to tell you something. I found something. In the chest. The silence that came then was not like the other silences. It had color in it. It had weight. It was the silence of someone who has been dreading a particular moment for 30 years, and has just heard the footsteps of it coming down the hall. "I'll come to you," she said, very quietly. She was at his apartment within the hour. She came through the door in her good coat and her close-cropped dignity, and her eyes swept the apartment immediately, the way they always did, and found Adaize in the kitchen. The two women looked at each other. Adaize's expression was open and careful, and entirely without triumph. She stepped forward slightly. "Please come in, Iomionim," she said, using the word for mother-in-law, quietly, without ceremony, as if it were simply the right word for the person standing in the doorway. Sunhee's jaw tightened, but she came in. They sat at the kitchen table, all three of them. Junho placed the chest in the center of the table. He opened it. He found the bundle of letters with the red ribbon and he pushed them, gently, across the table toward his mother. Sunhee looked at them. She didn't touch them. Her face had gone completely still in the way that faces go still when the body is managing something it does not yet know how to process. "You went through my things," she said. Her voice was flat. "Yes," Junho said. He did not apologize. "Not yet. I'm sorry that I did it without asking. But, Ioma, I needed to understand you. Because I love you. And I could not keep not understanding." "You don't know what you're seeing," she said. "I think I do," he said softly. Kofi Mensah, Yonsei University, 1986. The name came down like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples moved across her face slowly, and then she was very still, and then, without warning, without any of the composure she had maintained for 3 decades, she reached out and picked up one of the letters. Just picked it up, held it with both hands, looked at the handwriting on the front of the envelope. And Park Sunhee, who had not cried in front of her son once in 31 years, began to cry. Not loudly, just tears, silent and steady, falling down her face in the particular way of tears that have been held back for so long they have forgotten how to hurry. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then Junho said, very gently, "He wrote to you until he stopped. What happened?" Sunhee closed her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My father found the letters. He had been going through my room. He found all of them." She stopped, swallowed. "He said that if I continued any contact with Kofi, he would report him to the immigration authorities, make a complaint against his scholarship. He had connections in the ministry. He could have done it. He could have had him sent back in disgrace." Her breath shook. "So I stopped writing back. I stopped taking his calls at the dormitory. I simply disappeared from his life. I didn't explain. I was too ashamed to explain. I just went silent. And then you married Appa, 6 months later, because my father arranged it and I couldn't." She shook her head. "I had nothing left to care about who I married. I had already let go of everything that mattered." The three of them sat with that for a moment. "Ioma," Junho said. "He's okay. I looked him up. Kofi Mensah. He's a retired professor of architecture in Accra. He has a wife, children, grandchildren. He built a foundation. He's well." Sunhee looked up at her son, and on her face was an expression he had never seen there before, completely stripped of everything she used to manage herself. Raw, childlike. The face of a young woman who had made a terrible sacrifice under terrible pressure, and had spent 30 years not knowing whether the person she sacrificed had survived it. "He's well," she whispered. "He's well," Junho said. And then something broke open in her, quietly, slowly, like a fist that has been clenched for so long it has forgotten how to open, and then, one finger at a time, finally does. Ado's hand moved across the table and covered Sunhee's. The older woman looked down at it, stayed very still, then looked up at Adaize directly, for the first, real, unguarded time. "I looked at you," Sunhee said, her voice hoarse, "and I could not bear it, because you reminded me of everything I had not been brave enough to keep. And instead of understanding that, I made it your fault." She pressed her lips together. "That was very wrong. You deserved none of what I gave you." Adaize's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "You were carrying something impossible," she said. "You were trying to protect your son from your own pain." "What? I understand that. I was trying to protect myself," Sunhee said, with the flat honesty of someone who has finally stopped lying to themselves. "I told myself it was about him, about his future. but it was about me. About how much it hurt to see him have what I had been denied. She shook her head. And you sat through all of it. You never. No, Adaeze said simply. I didn't. A pause. Because he loves you, and I intend to love everyone he loves. That was never a condition. It was just true. Healing, in real life, does not arrive all at once. It comes in increments. In small, careful gestures. In meals, shared that did not have to be shared. In phone calls that are brief and then, over time, less brief. In the slow, almost imperceptible relaxing of a posture that has been rigid for too long. Over the months that followed, Sun-hee began to appear. At dinners she had previously declined. At Junho's apartment on Sunday afternoons, she arrived quietly, always with something. A container of food, a small household item she had noticed he needed. She never came empty-handed, because empty-handed was not a language she spoke. She and Adaeze moved around each other carefully at first, like two people who have rearranged the furniture in a shared room and are still learning where everything is. But the furniture had been rearranged, that was the thing. And slowly, in the way that people discover each other when the pretense of opposition falls away, they began to find what was actually there. Sun-hee asked once, with formal awkwardness, about Adaeze's research. Adaeze explained it. The healthcare infrastructure project, the community health model she was building, the policy proposal she was drafting for a collaboration between Korean NGOs and West African health ministries. Sun-hee listened carefully. Then she said, "Who funded the original fellowship?" Adaeze told her. Sun-hee nodded. "That's a good foundation," she said. "They are serious." It was the first time she had said anything that implied she believed Adaeze's work was real. It was small. It was enormous. Junho and Adaeze married in October of 2021. A small ceremony, formally registered on a Wednesday at the local government office with 2 witnesses, then celebrated on the following Saturday at a rooftop restaurant in Mapo-gu, where the guest list was intimate and the food was, by unanimous decision, both. Adaeze's mother, Ngozi Okonkwo, had flown in from Enugu. She was a retired secondary school principal, compact, upright, with the unshakable bearing of a woman who had spent 30 years commanding the attention of rooms full of adolescents and had never once raised her voice to do it. She had her daughter's eyes, the same quality of attention in them. When Ngozi and Sun-hee were introduced, they stood facing each other for a moment with the mutual assessment of 2 women who have each, in their own way, built something solid out of difficult material and recognized the evidence of it in each other's faces. Then Ngozi said, in measured English, "Your son loves my daughter very much." And Sun-hee said, also in English, with the care of someone choosing words from a language not her own, "Yes, he is very fortunate." And Ngozi said, "They both are." The 2 mothers spent most of the reception at the same table, talking in the slow, careful, surprisingly warm way of people who share more than they expected and are finding this out in real time. Junho watched them from across the room and did not say a word. Some things are too complete to add anything to. 3 months after the wedding, a letter arrived at Adaeze's NGO office in Seoul. It had been forwarded through the organization's public research network, addressed to her by name. It was from a man named Kofi Mensah, writing on behalf of an architectural foundation in Accra, Ghana. He had seen her organization's recent publication on community health infrastructure in rapidly urbanizing West African cities. He believed there might be meaningful overlap between her policy work and his foundation's sustainable housing projects. He was inquiring, formally, about the possibility of a collaboration. He did not know who she was. There was no way he could have known. He had found her name in a research journal, traced her organization, and written with the professional directness of a man who had spent 50 years building things and understood the value of not wasting time. Adaeze read the letter twice. Then she sat with it for a long time in her quiet office, looking out at the gray winter Seoul skyline. That evening she showed it to Junho. He read it again, looked up at her. "He doesn't know," Junho said. "No," she said. "He doesn't. What do you want to do?" Adaeze thought carefully. This was the kind of moment she had learned, over years, to approach with great care. Not because it was complicated in its logistics, but because it involved other people's grief, other people's private reckonings, things that had to be handled with both hands. I want to respond, she said finally. Professionally. Build the partnership if it makes sense. Do the work, because the work is worth doing. She paused. And then, slowly, when the relationship is established, when the time is right, and not a moment before, I think your mother might want to know that he is not just okay, that he is good, that his life was full and purposeful, and that the boy she had to let go in 1989 became someone she does not need to carry guilt for. Junho was quiet for a moment. And if she wants to reach out to him herself, then that is her choice to make, Adayeze said. We don't arrange it. We don't push. We simply make it possible, and then we step back. He looked at his wife, the woman his mother had called a nobody, and he thought about what it costs a person to be this careful with someone who had hurt them. What kind of strength that actually required. Not the loud, obvious kind. The other kind. The kind that holds its shape even under sustained pressure. The kind that, in the end, is the only kind that actually changes anything. The collaboration was formalized in the spring of 2022, after 3 months of emails and 2 video calls and a great deal of careful paperwork. It turned out to be everything Adayeze had hoped. His foundation's deep expertise in low-cost, community-led construction complemented her organization's health policy framework in ways that attracted international attention and grant funding neither had been able to access alone. Kofi Mensah was, in person, or the version of in person that video calls provided, exactly the man his letters had suggested he might become. Principled and precise, with a dry wit that surfaced unexpectedly, a way of listening that made you feel your point had been genuinely received, rather than simply waited out. He had the settled quality of someone who had made peace with the large things in his life and had the energy freed up by that peace to concentrate on the work. He and Adayeze developed a good working relationship over the months of their collaboration. Professional, respectful, genuinely productive. He did not know who she was married to. She was not ready to tell him yet. Some conversations require more foundation than others, and this one required the most careful foundation of all. In the summer of 2022, Sunhee did something that surprised everyone in her life, including herself. She booked a solo trip to a coastal resort town, a small, quiet place on the Yellow Sea that Korean retirees went to for sea air and long walks, and the kind of deliberate stillness that city life rarely allows. She told no one in advance. She simply left a note for Junho that said she needed a few days to herself, and she was gone for 5 days, and when she came back she looked, not different, not healed in any visible and dramatic sense, but clearer, as though something that had been slightly off-center for years had finally settled back into alignment. She came to the apartment on the Sunday after she returned. She and Adayeze stood in the kitchen together and cooked, for the first time, side by side, Korean oxtail soup, doganitang, and Nigerian pepper soup, the pantries of 2 countries negotiating their differences over a shared stove, one woman saying the ginger needs more time, and the other lifting a lid to add something dark green and fragrant that the first woman had never seen before, and was, after a moment's hesitation, persuaded to try. Junho sat at the kitchen table and watched his mother and his wife work together in the warm kitchen light, and he did not say a single word, because there are moments in a life so full and so complete that the only appropriate response is to be very, very still inside them. At dinner, after everything had been served and the first tastes taken and appreciated, Sunhee put down her spoon and looked at Adayeze with the directness she had once used only as a weapon, and had now, slowly, learned to use as a form of trust. "The man your organization works with in Accra," she said. "The architect. His name is Kofi Mensah." Adayeze met her eyes. She had known this was coming. She had been waiting for it without knowing exactly when. "Yes," she said. "Is he well?" Sunhee asked. Her voice was completely steady. Under the table, her hands were not. "He is very well," Adayeze said. "He is a good man. He built something meaningful. His foundation has changed real communities, real lives. He seems at peace." She paused. "He has grandchildren. He speaks about them the way people do when grandchildren are the best thing that ever happened to them." Something moved across Sunhee's face. A long, slow release of something she had been holding for 30 years. "Good," she said. Her voice was soft. "That is very good." She picked up her spoon, tasted the pepper soup for the first time. Something happened on her face. Surprise, then pleasure, then the conscious, deliberate decision to let something in. "This," she said, and her voice was warm in a way it had taken her a long time to arrive at, "is extraordinary." Adeyeze smiled, the deep kind, the one that reached everything. "My mother's recipe," she said. "I'll tell her you said so. She'll be very pleased." Sunhee nodded, and for a moment, as she looked, Junho thought, like herself. Her true self, the young woman from Chungcheong who had gone to Seoul at 18 and found a library and a curious boy with a Korean grammar book and the brief, bright knowledge that she could be seen for exactly who she was. That woman was still in there, had been in there all along. She had just been buried under everything else for a very long time. In October of 2023, 4 years to the month after that first frozen dinner in Sinchon, Sunhee Park sat by her window in her apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, with the Seoul ginkgos turning gold outside and a phone number on the paper in her hand. Adeyeze had given it to her 3 weeks earlier, without ceremony, without explanation, without any of the framing that might have felt like pressure. She had simply folded a piece of paper and left it on the kitchen counter during a Sunday visit, and not mentioned it. Sunhee had understood immediately what it was. She had picked it up and put it in her pocket and said nothing, and gone home and placed it on her bedside table, where it had sat for 21 days. She had picked it up and put it back down 4 times. On the 22nd day, she dialed. A man's voice answered, clear and warm, with the rounded lilt of a Ghanaian accent, gentled by decades of academic English. "Hello?" Sunhee gripped the phone. Outside her window, Seoul blazed gold. "Kofi," she said. "It is Sunhee." A silence. Not the startled silence of someone blindsided. Adeyeze had told him, weeks before, with Junho's blessing, carefully, gently, the way she did everything. She had given him time. He had taken 3 weeks to decide whether he wanted this. He had called Adeyeze back after those 3 weeks and said yes. "Sunhee," he said quietly, "I know." They talked for 40 minutes. They did not try to revisit everything that had happened. That was not the purpose of the call, and both of them understood that. Instead, they talked carefully, honestly, with the particular tenderness of 2 people who had once loved each other and now existed in each other's lives at a great and appropriate distance. He told her about his wife, a Ghanaian woman he had married in 1995, a cardiologist, formidable and funny, his great good fortune, about his children, 3 of them, all grown, about the grandchildren, about the foundation and the housing projects, and what it felt like to watch things he had designed get built and lived in. She told him about Junho, about the engineering, the marriage, the extraordinary woman her son had chosen. She did not say she had resisted it at first. He did not ask. "I needed you to know," she said, near the end, "that what happened was not because I did not care. It was because I was a frightened young woman in a family I could not stand against. That does not excuse it, but I needed you to know it." A pause. "I know," Kofi said. "I understood that eventually. It took time, but I understood it." His voice was kind, without any residue of bitterness she could detect. "And I want you to know, I had a good life, Sunhee, a full life. What your father did was cruel, but it did not ruin me. I built something. I loved people well. I was all right." She closed her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for telling me that. Take care of yourself," he said. "And tell your son, tell him his wife is remarkable. She is one of the most careful, most thoughtful people I have ever worked with." "I know," Sunhee said, and for the first time there was not a trace of difficulty in saying it. Just the simple truth of a woman who had finally come to know something she should have known sooner. She hung up, sat for a long time in the afternoon light, hands quiet in her lap, the ginkgos blazing outside. Then she called Junho. He answered on the second ring. "Ioma, are you okay?" "Yes," she said. Her voice was clear and steady, and light in a way it had not been in years. "I'm okay." She paused. "Is Adeyeze there?" "She's right here. Tell her." She stopped, chose her words, the way she chose everything, precisely and with full intention. "Tell her I would like to learn to make her mother's pepper soup properly, not just follow the recipe. Learn it the right way." A breath. "Tell her I would like her to teach me." Junho was quiet for a moment. She heard him smile. She was smiling too. "I'll tell her, Ioma," he said. "She'll be glad." There is an idea in Igbo philosophy, the concept of chi, the personal spirit. The part of you that carries not just your own destiny, but the unresolved resonances of those who came before you. That what our parents could not finish, could not face, could not be brave enough to choose, those things do not simply disappear. They travel. They find their way into the next generation, the next story, the next chance. Park Sun-hee had loved a man from Ghana in 1987 and had been made to let him go. That love had been buried, sealed shut, turned into grief, and then into fear, and then into a wall she called wisdom, and lived behind for 30 years. And then her son, who knew none of this, who had simply climbed a mountain and offered a woman his extra kimbap at the summit, brought home someone who carried, in her bones and her laugh and her patient, unshakable way of standing in the world, the echo of everything his mother had once known and lost, not by design, not by fate in any simple sense, but by the complicated, inexorable logic of love, that it does not end simply because we bury it, that it travels, that it waits. Adaeze Okonkwo did not save Park Sun-hee by doing anything grand or dramatic. She did not fight for her, argue with her, outlast her in any contest of wills. She simply refused to disappear. She stayed fully herself, made her work real, loved Junho without apology, and left every door open that she could. She had walked into a family carrying 30 years of unresolved grief, and she had, without being asked to, without any obligation to, made herself the thing that finally gave that grief somewhere to go. The woman Sun-hee Park had called an African nobody turned out to be the most important person to walk into her family since her son himself was born. She was the answer to a question Sun-hee had not known she was still asking. She was the key to a door Sun-hee had not known was still locked. And so what do we take from all of this? We take this. The people who push us away are often pulling something toward them. Some old wound, some grief too large to name, some version of themselves they buried alive and cannot stop trying to protect. That is not an excuse for the harm they do. It is a map to the truth beneath it. We take this. The love we resist most fiercely is sometimes the love that most resembles something we were not allowed to keep. And rather than recognize it, we call it wrong. We call it foreign. We call it a threat to everything we have carefully built. We give our fear a name and a face, and we stand behind it and call it wisdom. And the tragedy is that we are not lying. We genuinely believe it is wisdom. We genuinely believe we are protecting something. We are protecting ourselves from the very thing that could have healed us. And we take this. Sometimes love comes dressed in the face of the thing you most feared, and it stands at the door without demanding entry, and it waits, and it does its work. And one day, not the day you expected, not in the way you imagined, the door opens, and what is on the other side of it is not what you braced yourself for. It is grace. Park Junho chose a woman his mother could not accept, and in doing so, he handed his mother the only key that had ever fit the lock she had been living behind. Adaeze Okonkwo walked into a family that did not want her and loved it, quietly, steadily, without conditions, until it learned how to want her back. And Sun-hee Park, who had spent 30 years believing that the life she had once reached for was gone forever, discovered, in the kitchen of her son's apartment, with a bowl of pepper soup steaming in front of her, and the sound of two women who had decided, against everything, to love each other, that it was not gone. It had just been waiting. For her to be brave enough, finally, to say, let it in. If you stayed with this story all the way to the end, and I know you did, then you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. The kind of person who believes that a story told well can change the way you see the world. The kind of person who watches not just with their eyes but with their whole self. So here is what I am asking you to do right now. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a single story. Drop a comment below. I want to know which moment in this story hit you the hardest. Was it Sun-hee on the kitchen floor? Was it the letters in the chest? Was it Adaeze saying, I intend to love everyone he loves? Was it the pepper soup? Tell me. Because the conversation in the comments is always the best part of every video we make. Like this video. Share it with one person who needs to hear it today. Because there is always someone in your life who is standing behind a door they built themselves, waiting for someone patient enough to leave it open and come back. Because there is always another story on this channel. A story that will move you, shake you, and remind you of something you forgot you already knew. We will see you in the next one. Some walls are not built from stone. They are built from old love that had nowhere to go, love that was buried and sealed and renamed as caution and pride and protection. The only thing that brings walls like that down is not force. It is not argument. It is not time alone. It is the quiet, persistent, entirely ordinary miracle of someone who refuses to believe you are as closed as you are pretending to be. That is what Adaize was. That is what love, at its best, always is. The